The light from the Kalis was a sorrowful thing. A symphony of fractures and fading tones played across their crystalline bodies. They stood in the sterile, sound-dampened audience chamber of Mandate Command on Io, their multifaceted forms absorbing and refracting the harsh lumen strips overhead until they bled rainbows onto the polished chrome floor. Their plea came not as sound, but as a direct, resonant broadcast, a light song that vibrated in the bones and painted images of cosmic horror behind the eyes of every human present. We saw worlds of intricate, glowing lattices and singing cities being consumed by a silent, inexorable tide of gray. They called it the Dross, a name that felt too simple for the existential dread it conjured. It was a plague of self-replicating, microscopic machines that devoured everything rock, metal, light, life, and left behind only inert, featureless dust. It didn't conquer, it erased. And now, the Kalis claimed it was turning its cold, unthinking gaze toward the arm of the galaxy humanity called home. Their song was one of utter desperation, a final, desperate chord from a species facing extinction. They offered us their secrets, the keys to their legendary energy lattice technology that powered their now dying civilization, in exchange for one thing: a weapon. They needed humanity, the chaotic, unpredictable, brutally efficient species known for fighting when all logic dictated flight. They believed our penchant for illogical, asymmetric warfare was the only thing that could bypass the Dross's perfect, machine-like patterns and strike the central nexus they claimed was its heart. Most of the Mandate's council saw only risk, a foreign war with an unknowable enemy for a technology they couldn't trust. But Colonel Eris Thorn saw the numbers. He stood apart from the politicians and generals, a tall, unnervingly still figure whose eyes seemed to watch the world through an invisible data slate. To Thorn, the universe wasn't a place of wonder or terror, but a cascade of probabilities. While the others saw a plea for help, he saw expansion vectors, replication rates, and resource consumption models. His own mind, a place of cold, augmented logic, processed the Salus's light song not as a cry of despair, but as a raw data stream. His conclusion was delivered in a voice devoid of emotion, a monotone that cut through the chamber's hushed debate. Their projections are conservative. My analysis indicates a 78.4% probability that the Dross will reach the outer colonies within 50 standard years. Its exponential growth rate is logarithmically consistent. We are not debating intervention. We are debating the location of our graves. Thorn was a mnemonic, a relic of the Outer Rim skirmishes. His consciousness hardwired into the very fabric of battlefield networks. His scars weren't on his skin, but in his own source code, ghost data from fallen comrades and corrupted firewalls that sometimes flickered behind his placid expression. He was a man who had forgotten how to feel, but had never forgotten how to calculate an endpoint. The Mandate, ever cautious, would not commit its grand fleet. But Thorn's numbers were undeniable. They granted him access to Protocol Umbra, authorizing the reactivation of a single, deniable asset, the experimental frigate Straylight and its crew, the Phantoms of the Void. The Phantoms were not soldiers in any conventional sense. They were weapons deemed too unstable for the arsenal, decommissioned assets living in quiet obscurity, tied to their pasts by threads of trauma and unique, violent talent. Thorn's first stop was a forge moon orbiting a brown dwarf, a desolate rock where the only sound was the perpetual low hum of industrial resonators. He found Kalen Vance in the heart of the machinery, a man sculpted from wire-thin muscle and nervous energy, his hands shaping a sonic chisel that could peel armor from a cruiser. They called him Echo, not just for his mastery of frequencies, but for the way he was haunted by the phantom vibrations of every life he'd disintegrated, the silent screams that still played in the hollows of his mind. He didn't look up when Thorne approached, his eyes fixed on the vibrating tool. "Don't need a ghost whisperer. Colonel, the choir in my head is full." Thorne's voice was flat. "I'm not here for confession. I'm here for a demolitions expert." "The Dross are on the move." Echo flinched, the sonic chisel in his hand wavering for a microsecond. The Dross. A perfect, silent enemy for a man haunted by noise. He shut down the resonator, the sudden quiet of the forge screaming louder than any machine. Where do I sign? The next phantom was harder to find. A ghost in the machine of the galaxy. Lyra Orlova existed only as a whisper in the deep net, a phantom presence haunting encrypted data havens. Thorne found her not in person, but as a flicker of code in a black market server hub hidden in the Luton 726-8 system. She was a neural warfare specialist, an infiltrator who could slip through firewalls of steel or consciousness with equal ease. Her message appeared on Thorne's private comms. Uninvited and untraceable. They call you a mnemonic, a man who thinks in code. You should know better than to walk into my house unannounced. Thorne didn't bother with pleasantries. He broadcast the Dross data packet terabytes of horrifying, silent destruction. The response was almost instantaneous. A machine that only consumes. No network. No consciousness to break. What use am I? You're a scout. Ghost, Thorne replied, speaking to the empty air of his shuttle's cockpit. You see the patterns others miss, and this pattern feels wrong. There was a long pause, a silence that stretched across light years. Then, a single set of coordinates appeared on his screen, a rendezvous point. The final piece of his broken triad was Silas Core, a man who was more machine than flesh, a survivor of the brutal Mechanist Wars. Breaker was a cyborg whose body was a patchwork of polished chrome and scarred synth skin. Thorne found him in a gladiatorial pit on a lawless station in the Tau Ceti system, where augmented fighters tore each other apart for the entertainment of crime syndicates. Breaker moved with a terrifying grace, his augmented limbs driving through an opponent's defenses like pistons, his every motion an act of brutal, efficient communication. He fought not with rage, but with a cold, mechanical purpose, as if testing the limits of his own design. After the fight, as medics scraped what was left of his opponent off the arena floor, Thorne approached him in the reeking chrome tunnels below. Breaker was injecting nutrient paste into a port in his neck, his optical sensors glowing a soft, analytical blue. "The mandate decommissioned me," he rumbled, his voice a low thrum of servos and synthesized chords. "Said I was obsolete." "War is never obsolete," Thorne stated. "It just changes its tools. The Kalis have given us a target, a machine nexus. You understand machines." Breaker turned his head, the motion unnaturally smooth. His gaze was intense, analytical. He saw the logic immediately. A non-sentient plague, a central point of failure. It was an engineering problem, and Silas Core was an engineer of deconstruction. "Tell me the force-on-force projections." They gathered aboard the Straylight, a ship as stark and functional as its crew. Docked in a shadow station hidden in the Oort cloud, it was a blade of a vessel, all sharp angles and non-reflective plating. Its corridors were silent, its air recycled and sterile, its presence more akin to a deep space tomb than a military frigate. The Phantoms were connected to the ship not just as crew, but as components of its central nervous system. Through neural interfaces in their separate, isolated pods, they became the living consciousness of the Straylight, their collective will guiding its every move. Thorn was its brain, Echo its voice, Ghost its eyes, and Breaker its iron fists. There was no camaraderie, no shared mess hall stories, just the quiet hum of the ship and the shared purpose of the mission. Their only contact with the outside was the Salus ambassador, its crystalline form shimmering on the main view screen, its light song filling the bridge with projections of the route to the Nexus, deep in what they called the corroded systems. The journey was long and silent. As they moved through the star-dusted black, Ghost began her work. She didn't sleep, her consciousness sprawling out into the void, sifting through the background radiation of the cosmos. The Dross-infected systems were just as the Hylas had described, eerie voids of space filled with the fine, gray dust of dead worlds. There was no radiation, no wreckage, no signs of a struggle. Just the profound, absolute silence of cosmic erasure. But Ghost was looking for what wasn't there. Beneath the chaotic noise of stellar winds and the deafening silence of the Dross, she found something else. It was faint, a structured signal buried under layers of quantum foam, almost impossible to distinguish from background noise. It wasn't a transmission. It was more like the ghost of one, an echo of a whisper. It feels structured. Her thought imprint appeared in Thorn's neural feed. Not machine code, not like any I've ever encountered. It's harmonic, almost biological. Thorn processed this new variable. A non-sentient plague should not be broadcasting anything. He cross-referenced the frequency with the Kalis' data package. Nothing. The aliens had conveniently omitted it. Echo. Thorn subvocalized into the neural link. Analyze the Kalis' light song from the I.O. briefing. Filter for resonant frequencies matching Ghost's signal. The response came back moments later, tinged with Echo's own brand of weary cynicism. It's a match. A subharmonic. Kernel. Deeply embedded. Like a watermark. Whatever Ghost is hearing out here, the Kalis were singing the same tune back home. They've been broadcasting it all along. A trap. The probability shifted in Thorn's mind, the clean lines of the mission blurring into something ugly and uncertain. The desperation of the Kalis was a mask. This wasn't a simple extermination mission. They were being led. Breaker, ever the pragmatist, felt it too. The structural integrity of this plan is compromised. His thought stream registered, cold and clear. The enemy is an unknown. The objective is suspect. We are operating on faulty intelligence. We continue, Thorn commanded, his own resolve a cold, hard thing in the center of their shared consciousness. The variable has changed, but the endpoint remains. We need to see what's at the heart of this. Finally, the Straylight dropped out of warp at the Kalis' provided coordinates. The system was supposed to hold the Dross Nexus, but there was no swirling vortex of nanites, no central processing hub of a mechanical swarm. Before them hung a planet. But it was unlike any they had ever seen. It wasn't a world of gray dust. It was perfectly, flawlessly black, encased in a shell of smooth, non-reflective crystal that drank the light of its distant star and gave nothing back. The silence in the system was different. It wasn't empty, it was waiting. Ghost's senses screamed. The whispers she had heard in the void were a roar here, a silent, psychic broadcast that made the ship's hull feel thin as paper. And in the center of the black planet, a single Oa, colossal energy signature pulsed, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat of unimaginable power. Echo ran a diagnostic, his mind reeling from the scale of it. "Colonel, that pulse. The energy signature. It's a perfect resonant match. It's not the dross. It's Kalis." Thorn stared at the silent, black sphere, the pieces clicking into place with the cold, final certainty of a firing solution. The Kalis, the dross, the whispers, the perfectly encased planet. They weren't sent here to destroy a plague. They were brought here as a key. The resonating pulse from the planet shifted, its frequency changing subtly, locking onto the stray light, locking onto them. And from the black, crystalline surface, a light began to shine. Not the sorrowful, fractured light of the pleading aliens, but a pure, hungry, intelligent white. They hadn't flown into a battlefield. They had been delivered to an altar. The light did not burn, it seeped. It was a pressure, a physical weight on their consciousness that bypassed the ship's hull and the isolation of their pods, as if they were nothing more than suggestions. It flooded the shared neural space of the stray light, not with heat or energy, but with a profound, terrifying intimacy. They were no longer four minds linked to a machine. They were four open books laid before a silent, voracious reader. For Thorn, the assault was an intrusion of pure chaos. His mnemonic mind, a fortress of cold, stacked probabilities and logical sequiturs, was suddenly awash with alien emotion, concepts that had no corresponding human word. He felt the slow, patient satisfaction of a star being born and the agonizing, geological crawl of a continent's tectonic plates grinding together over millennia. His own thoughts became sluggish, his calculations corrupted by variables he couldn't quantify. The ghost data of his fallen comrades, usually just silent, corrupted files in the periphery of his memory, began to stir, their last moments of agony replaying not as data, but as raw, unfiltered terror. He felt their deaths as if they were his own, 1,000 times over. A feedback loop of failure designed to break the cold logic that defined him. Ghost was at the forefront of the wave, her consciousness the prow of their vessel cutting through this psychic ocean. Where Thorn felt chaos, Lyra felt structure, an intellect so vast and ancient it made the sum of human knowledge feel like a single, misspelled word on a forgotten page. She saw its mind, not as a brain, but as a galaxy of thought. Each star a soul it had consumed, each nebula a civilization it had cataloged and absorbed. It wasn't attacking them with malice, it was dissecting them with the detached curiosity of a biologist pinning a new species of insect to a board. It sifted through her memories with an unnerving gentleness, lingering on her childhood, on a forgotten orbital station, on the first time she bypassed a corporate firewall, on the quiet satisfaction of becoming a ghost. It wanted to know not just what she could do, but why. It was tasting the flavor of her identity. The experience was far more brutal for Echo. The psychic broadcast was a carrier wave, and it used the resonant frequencies of his own trauma to deliver its payload. The phantom screams that lived in the quiet corners of his mind were suddenly amplified, given substance and voice. He heard every person he had ever disintegrated with his sonic weapons, not as faint echoes, but as a deafening choir, their voices accusing, begging, screaming his name inside his skull. The ship's internal comms crackled, and it wasn't static. It was their voices, bleeding out from his mind into the machine. He saw their faces superimposed over the instrument panels, their eyes burning with the memory of their own vaporization. The entity was using his guilt as a weapon, turning his soul into a resonance chamber for its power. Breaker's torment was one of duality. The organic parts of him, his brain, and the remnants of his central nervous system were flooded with a primal, animal fear he hadn't felt since before his augmentation. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic, fleshy drumbeat against the steady, cool thrum of his internal power core. But his machine components saw something else. His optical sensors, filtering the white light from the planet, translated it into a data stream of impossible complexity. His diagnostic software screamed with error messages as it tried to analyze a signal that was both energy and consciousness, a living equation that was actively rewriting itself as it was being observed. He was a paradox, a man experiencing pure horror while a part of his mind tried to debug it. Cognitive intrusion, his neural feed projected into the shared space, the words sharp with the effort of their formation. It's not attacking, it's indexing, it's learning our operational parameters. Thorn seized on Breaker's logic, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of his own mind. He fought to wall off the screaming ghost data, to erect a firewall of pure reason. Report. He forced the command through the link, his own mental voice strained. Ghost was the first to cohere. It's ancient. It doesn't think in terms of friend or foe. We are novelties. The Kalis weren't lying. It's fascinated by our capacity for asymmetric thought, desperation, rage, sacrifice. It's tasting us. It's using my memories as a weapon. Echo's thought stream was a ragged scream of agony. It's inside my head. It's wearing their faces. The stray light itself began to groan. The ship, so intertwined with their minds, was manifesting their psychological torment. Lights flickered in time with Breaker's panicked human heartbeat. The navigation system glitched, showing their position as the center of a dying star. A low, mournful tone, a perfect C-sharp, began to hum through the deck plates, the key of the first sonic chisel Echo had ever used to kill a man. They were trapped, anchored by a psychic grappling hook that was pulling their minds, and, by extension, their ship. Apart from the inside out, a direct attack was useless. How do you shoot a ghost? How do you bomb a god? It's a system. Thorn broadcast to them, his voice gaining a sliver of its old and cold authority. It has an input. It's us. We will change the input. He began to formulate a plan, a desperate, illogical gambit that went against every tactical doctrine he had ever known. The entity wanted to understand their unique minds, their specialized forms of thought, so they would give it a paradox, a blast of cognitive dissonance so jarring it might force the reader to slam the book shut. "Ghost," he commanded, "stop hiding. Open yourself to it. But don't give it your memories. Give it a labyrinth. Build it a perfect, recursive, logical loop with no solution, an unsolvable problem based on its own nature. Trap its curiosity." He could feel her immediate understanding, the flicker of her unique genius. A cognitive snare. I can do that. Breaker, Thorn continued, the machine and the man. It's trying to parse your duality. I want you to synchronize them, deliberately induce a full system seizure, a biomechanical convulsion, create a feedback loop between your organic panic and your machine diagnostics. Show it what happens when the system crashes. I need a spasm, a violent, unpredictable burst of noise on every level. Breaker's reply was grim but resolute. It will be unpleasant, but the logic is sound. Initiating cascade failure protocol. Echo. Thorn's command was softer now, reaching out to the man drowning in his own past. They are not real. It is using your pain as a frequency, so give it a new one. I don't want you to block the screams. I want you to harmonize with them. Take every voice, every ounce of your guilt and your rage, and turn it into a weapon. Create a chord of pure, focused agony, and broadcast it back. Don't just whisper, echo, scream. For a moment, there was only the sound of Echo's ragged breathing over the neural link. Then, a new thought, cold and sharp as broken glass, cut through his pain. A song of sorrows for an audience of one. Understood. Thorn himself would be the conductor. He opened his own mind, not to fight the chaos, but to channel it. He took the terror of the ghost data, the alien emotions, the crushing weight of the entity's presence, and he focused it all into a single, unassailable point of pure, cold, intent survival. A thought so simple, so primal. It was beneath the notice of a cosmic intelligence, yet so powerful it could anchor them all. On my mark, he commanded. Now. The Straylight's neural space erupted. Ghost unfurled her consciousness into a beautiful, terrifying fractal of impossible logic. A maze of thought that promised ultimate understanding, but led only to itself. A self-referential trap for a curious god. Breaker's body arched in his pod, every synthetic muscle and organic nerve firing at once in a chaotic, synchronized fit, sending a jolt of pure systemic error shrieking through the psychic link, and from Echo's pod. A wave of sound and something more than sound blasted outward. It was the Kalis's frequency, inverted, corrupted, a harmony of pain and defiance, a chord of such misery and rage that it was no longer a plea, but a curse. The white light from the black planet flickered. For the first time, the immense, patient curiosity of the entity was disrupted. It had been presented with a symphony of chaos it could not catalog, a perfectly structured insanity. The psychic pressure lessened, the grappling hook slackening for a single, crucial moment. Jump. Thorn screamed, his own mind pouring every ounce of will into the ship's FTL drive. The stray light tore a hole in space-time, not with the clean precision of a military vessel, but with the jagged, desperate lurch of a wounded animal. The transition was violent. Stars smeared into bleeding lines of light, and the ship groaned as it was thrown blindly into the roiling currents of subspace. Then, silence. A profound, ringing silence that was somehow more deafening than the psychic roar. They were adrift. The view screen showed a swirling, unfamiliar nebula. Alarms blared, signaling a cascade of system failures from the uncontrolled jump. Breaker was unconscious in his pod, his vitals spiking erratically. Ghost was silent, her consciousness withdrawn into a tight, defensive ball. And from Echo's pod, there was a single, repeating sound. A soft, broken whisper. "They're quiet," he was murmuring, over and over again. "They're finally quiet." Thorn stood on the bridge. the cold logic returning to his mind. But it offered no comfort. They were alive. They were free, but they were lost, crippled, and they had looked into the mind of their true enemy. This was no longer a mission. It was a haunting, and the ghosts now knew their names. The silence that followed the jump was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from ozone and dread. For a long moment, the only sound on the Straylight's bridge was the frantic, discordant symphony of a dozen critical system alarms. Gravity fluctuated, sending loose tools skittering across the deck plates in a zero-G ballet before slamming them back down. Red emergency lighting painted the stark as a functional space in bloody strokes. Colonel Thorne stood anchored to the command console, his boots magnetized to the floor, a still point in the chaos. He worked methodically, his face an impassive mask as his fingers flew across the holographic interface, silencing the alarms one by one, not fixing the problems, but simply quieting their screaming. He was triaging the ship's panic, imposing a veneer of order over a foundation of absolute failure. His first priority was the crew. Status. He subvocalized into the neural link, a command that felt like pushing a lead weight through his own mind. The first to respond was Breaker, his consciousness flickering back into the shared space like a faulty lumen strip. His neural feed was a chaotic stream of raw data, rebooting primary motor functions. Organic systems reporting adrenaline surge, tachycardia, recalibrating optical sensors, structural integrity of chassis at 98.7%. Cognitive trauma detected. It was the cold, analytical report of a machine assessing damage to its own fleshy components. Functional. His thought stream finally clarified, the single word costing him a visible effort. The ship is not. He was right. The Straylight was bleeding energy from a dozen microfractures in its power conduits. The FTL drive was a molten ruin, and the navigation system was hopelessly lost, unable to get a lock on a single known pulsar or quasar. They were a ghost ship adrift in an uncharted sea. Ghost remained a tight, silent knot in the network. Thorne could feel her presence, a fortress of code and psychic scar tissue, walled off from the rest of them. She wasn't unconscious. She was hiding. The entity's intrusion had been a violation of the deepest kind for a mind that defined itself by its inviolability. She had been seen, cataloged, understood. Thorne didn't try to force his way in. He simply opened a channel to her, projecting a single, clean data pack at the ship's diagnostic log. It was a problem, a puzzle of broken systems and corrupted code. It was an invitation not to speak, but to work. He knew that for Lyra Orlova, the path back from the abyss would be paved with logic. He found Echo sitting upright in his open pod, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes wide and unfocused. He wasn't catatonic. He was listening to the quiet hum of the life support, the gentle creak of the stressed hull, the whisper of the air recyclers. For the first time in a decade, the screaming choir in his head was gone. The psychic blast from the entity, filtered and weaponized through his own mind, had acted like a global reset, wiping the phantom recordings that had haunted his every waking moment. The silence was a miracle, but it had left a vacuum. His guilt had been his fuel, the source of his deadly art. Now, he was just a man in a quiet room, and the stillness terrified him more than the noise ever had. "They're gone. Colonel," he whispered, his voice hoarse. a stranger to his own ears. "It's all, quiet." Thorn looked at the man, hollowed out by peace, and understood. He had taken away Echo's ghosts, but he had also taken his purpose. Days bled into one another, measured only by the ship's chronometer and the slow progress of their repairs. Breaker became the heart of the ship's revival, a tireless engine of reconstruction. He moved through the wounded vessel with a singular focus, his augmented limbs bracing cracked support beams, his delicate micro-tools resoldering fried circuit boards. He worked without rest, driven by the pure, clean logic of his machine half. To fix the ship was to fix himself, to impose order on the chaos that had nearly torn him apart. He spoke only in reports, detailing power flow restorations and atmospheric pressure checks, his voice a steady, grounding hum in the broken ship's silence. Slowly, Ghost began to emerge. Her first act was to rewrite the Straylight's firewall protocols from the ground up, turning their network into an impenetrable fortress of recursive encryption. It was her way of rebuilding the walls in her own mind. Then, she began to hunt. She sifted through the terabytes of corrupted sensor data from their encounter, searching for a ghost of her own. It wasn't just reading us. Her thought imprint finally appeared in Thorn's private feed, the words precise and sharp. "It was a two-way exchange. While it was indexing me, I indexed it." Thorn felt a cold spark of anticipation. "What did you get?" "Not data. Not information. A resonance. A memory fragment, embedded in the carrier wave it used. It's alien, structured like a crystal, and it's not a memory of ours. It's a memory of the Kalis." That was the key. Thorn brought the fragment to Echo, who was still adrift in his newfound silence. He projected Ghost's findings onto the main screen in the medbay where Echo sat. It was a visual representation of the memory's frequency, a complex, shimmering lattice of light and sound. "The entity left this behind," Thorn said, his voice even. "It's a Kalis frequency. I need you to analyze it. I need you to listen to it." Echo flinched, his eyes recoiling from the image as if it were a physical blow. Listening was what had broken him. "There's nothing to hear," he mumbled. "It's quiet now." "No," Thorn said, his tone hardening slightly. "You're not listening for ghosts anymore. You're listening for evidence. You turned their screams into a weapon to save us. Now I need you to turn this lie into a compass." He left the image hovering in the air and walked out. For a full cycle, Echo stared at the silent, crystalline structure, at the shape of the sound that had almost destroyed them. Then, tentatively, he closed his eyes and began to listen, not with his ears, but with the unique, damaged pathways of his mind. He found it buried deep within the resonance, a sub-frequency so faint it was almost undetectable. It was a communication, a tight beam transmission from the Kalis to the Black Planet, sent moments after the Straylight had been captured by the psychic wave. It was a light song, but not the sorrowful, pleading one they had shown the mandate. This song was different. It was clean, precise, triumphant. It was a status report. Ghost decrypted it, translating the harmonic language into cold, hard text on the bridge's main view screen. Specimens delivered to the architect. Neural patterns are as predicted fractured, asymmetric, violent, ideal for the harvest. The deception was successful. The tool believes it is the weapon, awaiting further instructions for the next offering. The words hung in the silence of the bridge. Breaker stood motionless, his optical sensors glowing a dangerous, brilliant red. Ghost's presence in the network felt like a shard of ice. Thorn read the message once and then a second time. The dross wasn't a plague. It was a farming tool, a way to plow civilizations and prepare them for the architect. The Kalis weren't victims. They were shepherds, leading lambs to the slaughter in exchange for their own survival. And Protocol Umbra, the phantoms of the void, humanity's most unstable and dangerous weapons, were nothing more than the latest crop. They hadn't been sent to fight a war. They had been gift-wrapped. A new sound echoed on the bridge, a low, guttural hum. It was Echo. He stood in the doorway, his face no longer lost and empty, but carved from stone. The silence in his mind was no longer a peaceful vacuum. It was a whetstone. The ghosts were gone, but the rage remained, purified and focused. "I can find them," he said, his voice a low, resonant promise. "That transmission has a source. I can follow that song right back to their lying, crystalline throats." Thorn looked at his crew, the repaired machine, the avenging ghost, the silent musician of wrath. They were broken, yes, but they had been reforged. "The mandate is compromised," Thorn stated, his voice ringing with cold finality. They accepted Kalis data without verification. Protocol Umbra is a failed experiment. Our mission is void. He walked to the command console and, with a few keystrokes, severed the Straylight's connection to the Mandate's network, erasing their signature from every official record. They were truly phantoms now, accountable to no one. "Breaker, set a course based on Echo's coordinates. Ghost, I want every Kalis transmission within 100 light-years intercepted and decoded. We are no longer a deniable asset." He turned to face them, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "We are the denial." The Straylight, scarred but not broken, turned its prow towards a new, unseen star, its engines humming a new song. It was no longer a song of duty. It was a song of retribution. The hunt was a quiet, predatory thing. The Saint Raylight slipped through the interstitial spaces between stars, a sliver of vengeful shadow in the vast, uncaring dark. They were a self-contained universe of cold fury, their singular purpose a gravitational force that pulled them all into a tight, lethal orbit. Under Echo's guidance, they became ghost hunters, chasing the faint, harmonic residue of Kalis transmissions across the void. Echo had transformed. The haunted, weary man was gone, replaced by a focused instrument of sonic vengeance. He spent his cycles in a meditative trance. His consciousness merged with the ship's long-range sensors, listening to the whispers of the cosmos. He could discern the Kalis light songs from the background radiation of pulsars and the solar winds of distant stars, filtering their crystalline communications from the chaotic noise of the galaxy. He wasn't just tracking a signal, he was learning a language, the subtle dialects of deceit and complicity that flowed between the Kalis colonies. Ghost, in turn, became their cryptographer. Once Echo isolated a Kalis transmission, she would descend upon it like a hawk, her mind a whirlwind of algorithms and decryption keys. She peeled back the layers of their harmonic language, translating their elegant light songs into the brutal, ugly truths they concealed. She laid bare their entire operation, shipping manifests detailing tributes to the architect, star charts marking fallow systems where the dross had already cleared the field, and, most damningly, a series of communiques detailing their first contact with the Mandate. The Kalis hadn't just lied, They had meticulously studied humanity, identifying the precise psychological triggers: fear of the unknown, pride in their martial history, the arrogance of their perceived strength that would make their trap irresistible. They had played the mandate like a finely tuned instrument. Breaker was the ship's unwavering iron will. He pushed the battered Straylight to its absolute limits and beyond, rerouting power through scorched conduits and jury-rigging systems with a cold, mechanical grace. His hands, capable of crushing plasteel, could now perform microscopic solders on the FTL drive's control relays. He was the silent, tireless engine of their vengeance, his purpose reduced to a simple, elegant equation: keep the weapon sharp until it reached its target. He monitored the crew's vitals with the same detached efficiency, ensuring they had the requisite nutrient paste and REM cycles to function as optimal components of the mission. He was no longer just a cyborg. He was the ship's unforgiving, logical shepherd. Thorn was the strategist, the cold mind that processed the streams of information from his crew and shaped them into a weapon. He stood for hours before the holographic map, which was no longer a chart of their position, but a web of their enemies' lies. Ghost's decrypted intelligence flowed onto the map, Kalis colonies lighting up like nodes in a diseased nervous system. He saw their supply lines, their communication hubs, their patterns of deceit. The Kalis believed themselves safe, protected by their deal with a cosmic devil and the sheer vastness of space. They had no concept of a threat like the Straylight, a single, targeted bullet fired from the shadows. They operate with the arrogance of the shepherd, Thorn stated during one of their silent bridge meetings, his voice a low monotone that barely disturbed the air. They believe the wolves are all safely locked in the pen. They don't account for a wolf that has learned how to pick the lock. Their first target was a sailless relay station, a delicate, crystalline structure hanging in the gossamer veils of a stellar nursery. It was a primary communications hub, bouncing messages between the Kalis homeworld and the Architect system. According to Ghost's intercepts, it was manned by a small crew of Kalis technicians. It was a soft target, a place to test their new, unified purpose. They approached in silence, the Straylight's hull running at a temperature barely above the cosmic background, its emissions profile a ghost. They didn't hail. They didn't demand surrender. "Echo!" Thorn commanded from the darkened bridge. "Give them a new song." Echo closed his eyes. He didn't unleash a blast of sonic fury. He did something far more cruel. He took the recording of the Architect's psychic assault, the chaotic, mind-breaking wave of terror and confusion, and he broadcast it directly at the station. He didn't just play the sound, he replicated its very essence, shaping the ship's energy output into a carrier wave that mimicked the Architect's terrifying, intimate touch. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The crystalline station, built to resonate with harmonious light songs, shuddered as it was filled with a song of pure, psychic horror. Ghost, monitoring their network, watched their crystalline minds shatter. Their elegant, ordered consciousness, which had never known true fear or chaos, was suddenly flooded with it. The relay didn't explode. It simply went dark, its internal lattices fracturing, its inhabitants reduced to mindless, terrified crystals, their light extinguished forever. One node in the network had been severed. There was no celebration on the Straylight. They simply turned and vanished back into the dark. They moved like wraiths, striking with a precision that bordered on precognition. They hit a Kalis mining operation in an asteroid belt, not with torpedoes, but with a targeted sonic pulse from Echo that resonated with the precise frequency of the asteroids. The resulting chain reaction of exploding rock tore the facility to shreds. They found a Kalis research vessel, one that Ghost's intelligence revealed was transporting sentient species for the Architect's consumption, and Breaker, in a rare display of personal initiative, matched its velocity and used the Straylight's grappling arms to tear its engine section clean off, leaving it adrift and helpless. He did not destroy the ship, he simply left it to the cold. Slow mercy of the void. Each attack was different, asymmetric, a perfect reflection of the terrifying unpredictability the Architect had found so fascinating. They were giving the Kalis a lesson in human ingenuity. Their actions did not go unnoticed. The Kalis network erupted in a chorus of confused, terrified light songs. They had no frame of reference for this. They were being hunted by a phantom, an enemy that struck from nowhere and everywhere at once, an enemy that seemed to know their every move. They screamed for their Architect, but the black planet remained silent. Their dark god was a curious observer, not a protector. Finally, Thorn chose their ultimate target, the Kalis homeworld itself, not to destroy it, but to deliver a message. They offered us as a sacrifice to buy their own peace, Thorn said, his voice echoing in the cold silence of the bridge. We are going to return the gift. Their plan was audacious, a piece of psychological warfare so profound it would shatter the Kalis civilization to its core. They wouldn't attack the planet directly. They would attack its soul. The Kalis civilization was built on a foundation of perfect harmony, a shared consciousness they called the Great Resonance. It was their strength, their cultural bedrock. Ghost had found its frequency, the core of their collective identity. The Straylight appeared in high orbit over the Kalis homeworld, a single, black dagger hanging against the swirling, iridescent clouds of their gas giant home. The Kalis fleet, a beautiful and fragile collection of crystalline ships, moved to intercept. Their light songs, a mixture of fear and bravado. They expected a fight. They were not prepared for what came next. Breaker, hold our position. Do not fire, Thorn commanded. He nodded to Ghost and Echo. Begin. Ghost opened a channel, not to their military, but to the entire planet-wide Great Resonance. She bypassed their defenses as if they were children's toys. Then, Echo began his broadcast. He didn't send a scream of agony or a wave of psychic terror. He sent a single, pure, unmodified recording, the triumphant, prideful message the Kalis had sent to the Architect after delivering the Straylight. He broadcast their betrayal, in their own voice, into the heart of their shared soul. He looped it, endlessly. Specimens delivered. Ideal for the harvest. The deception was successful. The Great Resonance, the perfect harmony that had defined their species for millennia, became a discordant, self-devouring shriek. The Kalis fleet faltered, their ships drifting aimlessly as the minds of their crews were consumed by the undeniable public truth of their own damnation. On the planet below, their singing cities fell silent. The lie they had built their survival on had become a psychic poison, and it was now coursing through the veins of their entire civilization. They had been undone not by a weapon, but by the truth. Thorn watched the chaos unfold on the view screen, his face devoid of any emotion. The Straylight had not fired a single shot, but it had dealt a mortal blow. They are broken. Ghost's thought imprint stated, a note of finality in her tone. But as they watched the Kalis Empire crumble from within, a new signal appeared on their sensors. It was not Kalis. It was a single, impossibly powerful pulse, originating from the direction of the Black Planet. The architect had finished observing, and now it was responding. The architect's response was not a transmission. It was a physical alteration of space-time. The empty void between the Straylight and the Kalis homeworld warped, folding in on itself. Stars winked out of existence as a perfect, spherical rift tore open, a wound in the fabric of reality. It was not the violent, chaotic tear of a jump drive. It was a silent, deliberate incision. From this wound emerged a vessel, if such a term could apply to the geometric impossibility that drifted into being. It was a perfect octahedron, miles across, its surface the same light-devouring black as the architect's planet. It had no visible engines, no windows, no weapons. Its presence was a statement of absolute effortless power. It didn't feel like a machine. It felt like a law of physics that had decided to take a shape. The effect on the Kalis was instantaneous. Their internal chaos, their shrieking chorus of self-recrimination, ceased. The broadcast of their betrayal was snuffed out as if it had never existed. A new resonance, emanating from the octahedron, washed over their shattered civilization. It was not a song of comfort or forgiveness. It was a command of pure, absolute order. The Kalis ships stopped their aimless drifting and turned, with perfect, synchronized grace, to face the Straylight. Their shattered minds had been wiped clean, their free will erased and replaced by the single, cold purpose of their master. They were no longer a civilization. They were puppets. It took control of them. Ghost's thought stream was tight with alarm. It's using their entire fleet as a distributed weapons platform. Their minds are just nodes in its network now. On the view screen, the Kalis ships began to glow, their crystalline structures resonating with an energy that was not their own. They were being turned into focusing lenses, weapons to be wielded by the architect. Thorn. Breaker's voice was a low, urgent rumble. The octahedron is projecting a containment field. It's collapsing the space around us. We can't jump. We're caged. He was right. The stars around them were beginning to distort, their light bending as if viewed through a massive, invisible lens. They were trapped in a bottle, and the architect was the collector. This was the endpoint Thorn's calculations had always avoided, the variable that could not be quantified. He had waged a perfect, asymmetric war against the shepherds, only to find the wolf itself standing at the door. For a fleeting moment, he felt the ghost data of his fallen comrades stir, not with terror this time, but with a shared, final sense of inevitability. So this is it, Echo said, his voice quiet, devoid of fear. He looked at the silent, black shape of the architect's ship. He had spent a lifetime haunted by the ghosts of his past. Now, facing a true God, he felt an odd sense of peace. The quiet in his mind was no longer a vacuum. It was a space he had cleared for this exact moment. One final song. It thinks of us as a specimen, Thorn said, his eyes fixed on the octahedron. His mind was a whirlwind of probabilities, but for the first time, they were not calculations of victory, but of impact. It's fascinated by our chaos, our unpredictability. It wants to observe our final, desperate moments. He turned to face his crew, not on the bridge, but in the shared neural space that had become their true home. The Kalis were a tool. The Dross was a tool. This fleet is a tool. We are the only true weapon in this system. It wants a reaction. Let's give it one it can never catalog. His plan was not a strategy for survival. It was a blueprint for martyrdom, a final act of defiance so profound it would scar the entity's ageless memory. It was the most human, most illogical thing he had ever conceived. "Breaker," he commanded. "I want you to overload the ship's core. Not a quick detonation. I want a sustained, uncontrolled singularity. Turn the stray light into a temporary, dying star." Breaker's mechanical mind processed the order. Probability of survival, pseudo 0%. His organic mind simply replied, "It is a logical endpoint. The engineering will be beautiful." He began the sequence, the ship's heart starting a low, powerful thrum that vibrated through every deck. "Ghost." Thorn's command was precise. The architect took control of the Kalis by overwriting their great resonance. "I want you to prepare a mimetic virus. Not code. An idea. The most dangerous idea for a being of perfect order, the concept of an ending. Of mortality. We are going to broadcast our own extinction event into its network." Ghost's consciousness flared with a fierce, brilliant light. She had spent her life as a phantom, an observer in the shadows. Now, she would become a legend, a story whispered in the mind of a god. "I will craft an epitaph it will never forget." "Echo," Thorn said finally. "You are the carrier wave. The ship's core is your instrument. The virus is your voice. I need one last broadcast. I need you to create a chord that will echo longer than we will." Echo smiled. A true, genuine smile that reached his weary eyes. "A song of endings, for an audience of one," he repeated, his words no longer a cynical acceptance, but a declaration of purpose. As the Kalis fleet began to fire, their beams of focused energy scoring across the stray light's hull, the phantoms enacted their final, terrible symphony. Breaker stood amidst the shrieking chaos of the engine room, manually overriding every safety protocol, his augmented body glowing with the heat of the dying core. The ship began to come apart around him, but he was a statue of chrome and resolve, conducting the crescendo of his own destruction. Ghost wove her virus, not from code, but from the raw, unfiltered emotions of their final moments. Thorn's cold resolve, Breaker's logical acceptance, Echo's peaceful defiance, and her own fierce, burning pride. She shaped it into a single, perfect, indigestible concept. Even gods can die. Then, Echo sang. He opened every channel, merged his consciousness with the ship's exploding core, and broadcast their end. It was a sound that was also an idea, a feeling, a memory. It was the sound of a mnemonic's final, perfect calculation. It was the sound of a machine and a man dying as one. It was the sound of a ghost becoming a legend. It was the sound of silence being given a voice. The chord of their collective, defiant soul ripped through the Kalis network and slammed into the architect's consciousness. The stray light did not explode. It became light, a blinding, silent, white light that consumed the Kalis fleet and washed over the surface of the black octahedron. For a single, eternal moment, there was only that pure, defiant energy. And in the mind of the architect, something new bloomed. For the first time in a billion years of silent, orderly observation, It felt a flicker of something alien. It was not pain. It was not fear. It was a question. The mimetic virus, the story of the Straylight, had been planted. The concept of an ending now existed in a mind that had only known perpetuity. The octahedron did not move. The light faded, leaving behind only the cold, silent stars, and the ghost of a song. The phantoms of the void were gone. But their final, desperate act of illogical, asymmetric warfare had succeeded where no fleet could. They hadn't killed their god. They had done something far worse. They had taught it how to doubt. And in the ageless, patient mind of the architect, the seed of that doubt, the echo of that final song, would have an eternity to grow.